Custom editor templates are a lot like custom display templates that we looked at in the previous video. They allow you to globally change the way that data is collected into our view model for submission back into a post action result method. And we're going to look at that in depth in just a moment. We'll take a look at a plugin that's made for Bootstrap that'll allow us to select a date and time in a very interactive sort of way, as opposed to just typing it in. You can see here in a normal text box. However, before we do that, I want to remind you, as a way of ramping up to this idea, that you can affect the HTML that's emitted into forms by adding attributes onto properties of your data model. So, for example, let's take a look at the product class. So we have a description field of type string. I hope you noticed that all we had there, if we run the application again, all we had for the description was a single text box. But as you can see, I'm using my right arrow key to kind of move to the end of that line, and it just goes on and on. Ideally, what we would use is the right tool for the job, a text area that would allow the user to type in multiple lines and be able to see what they previously typed. And so you can change the number of rows and columns that are displayed in a text area, making the area larger, accepting a lot more input. So to affect that, all we really need to do is add an attribute called data type. And you might remember this from earlier. We talked about this, where we can create output that's specifically for collecting credit card numbers or currency or date, time, email addresses, passwords. And so you'll get, in most cases, just a regular text box, but usually the validation will check to make sure that it looks like a valid phone number or a valid email address and so on. However, in our case, what we want to do is say, hey, we want to display this string, but in a multi-line format, in a multi-line text box. So that's the first change that I'll make. Actually, let's just run it with that single change and take a look at the form now. And you can see that it will use a text area. So now it's a little bit better. We get some, up and down arrow keys that we can scroll through. But we can further improve this by going to the view itself, so in this case the edit view, and then making modifications to HTML attributes. So here, looks like we're in the editor for. So just like we had a display for helper method, we need to use the editor for helper method for this purpose. And we'll want to add in here another attribute called rows. We could also set columns, but because of the Bootstrap CSS that we're using, it's kind of restricting the width of all the HTML controls. So we won't change that, but let's go ahead and add a property rows equal 5. And now when we run the application, we'll be able to see not only, let's get back to home here. Not only do we have a text area, but then also the vertical spacing is greater, so we can see more of the text there. Pretty cool. All right, again, that isn't really custom editor templates, but it's in the same vein of thought, affecting the output of the edit and create HTML forms that are generated by adding attributes onto the domain model's properties, or the view model's properties. All right, so what we want to do is actually now integrate I believe it's a jQuery plugin. I didn't take the time to really look at this, called Bootstrap Date Picker. And it's a very nice way of selecting both a date and a time for a given date time field in our view model. Now, integrating this in can be a little bit tricky. We could just go ahead and plug in all of that markup and JavaScript that we just saw a moment ago. Unfortunately, I closed it down into this one page, but what about other pages where I want to use this date time picker anytime, in fact, that we have, we need to collect a date time from the end user? We would need to just copy and paste a lot of code. The better way to go about this is to create a custom editor template for the date time data type. So to get started on this, there's a couple of steps we're going to need to take. First of all, I'm going to need to go into the layout and add both a style sheet that's going to be used for the Bootstrap date time picker. So I'm going to paste it in here. And notice that I'm just getting it from a CDN. And if you take a look at that web page that we looked at a moment ago, it'll give you where you can grab these files, and then the JavaScript files as well that actually implement the date time picker. And I'm just going to put them here underneath our existing JavaScript files, like so. Again, take a look at the page that I showed you a moment ago for the instructions on how to grab the various JavaScript libraries that you're going to need to get this to work. Okay, so another option would be to only put this on the pages where you know you're going to need it. However, if we're going to use a custom editor template and we could potentially have a date time in many different places, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the layout page itself in this case. All right. So now that we've done that, we need to go to our Views shared folder, and I'm going to add a new folder that I'm going to call Editor Templates. Okay, that should look pretty familiar from the previous video where we created a folder called Display Templates. And here what we're going to do is add a razor page, a CSHTML page. So let's add a new item, and we're going to call this DateTimePicker.cshtml. Okay. And let's go ahead and rip everything out there. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste because there's quite a bit of code here. And then I can kind of talk through what it does. Let's bring this up to 125. Great. For the most part, this should be pretty self-explanatory, especially if you look at the help for the Bootstrap datetime picker. Here we simply have a div of type input group, and then inside of that an input box, and then this little span is for the little icon, the calendar icon off to the right. And the various classes will give us, the form control and things that we would typically see in our Bootstrap views. Now, the one thing that you'll notice is that we set the value here of our input to the model value that's passed in as a datetime. But also notice that I have this thing called an ID. I'm basically just taking the string datetime picker and then grabbing the ID attribute that will be passed in from the edit for helper method. I'll look at that in just a moment. And I'm doing this so that you can put multiple datetime pickers on the same form. If you don't do that, then they'll all have the same name, and when you go to retrieve the values, you won't know which one belonged to which value. Like a start date, end date, if they were both named the same, then how would you retrieve off which one was which? This little solution I came up with will handle that. Okay, and we compose a name for this control, and then we put it in the ID value, and you'll see how this all plays in a moment. You can see it actually at work here in the script below, where I'm actually wiring up the this specific instance of the datetime picker, calling the datetime picker method, and then passing in as an argument how we want the date formatted. So let's take a look now at an instance of using this. If you take a look in the edit.cshtml under our release date, you'll see that there's really not a lot. You'll see that we have nothing here that has the notion of an ID. That's because we need to pass it in. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. We really don't need it. In fact, we don't need anything related to the HTML attribute. So I'm just going to delete this whole thing out, and instead I'm going to do a new ID equals release date, and that's just again, what's going to get combined here in the date time picker in order to create date time picker and then release date, so that we can differentiate this from other instances of the date time picker that'll be used. All right. So that's how we get at view data. We pass it in as one of the arguments for the edit for, just newing up an anonymous object, but then giving it the properties that we want to set. In this case, an ID equals, and we give it some random string. Okay. So that's the next step. I think one of the last steps that we're going to need to take here is then to actually go to the model itself, and we're going to need to decorate it. Now, I said earlier, I kind of misspoke. I said we'd use this for all of our date times. However, it looks like the way that I implemented this was specifically I would adorn individual date time properties of my model classes with the UI hint attribute that we saw in the previous video, and then giving it the date time picker name, the same name that we see here in the datetime-picker.cshtml. And so if I did everything right, this should work. Let's go ahead and run the application. And here's the moment of truth. All right. So it looks like this is January 1st or January 11th, 2015, which is today's date. And then now I can pick different dates. Because I chose the format L, it didn't allow me to choose a time. That's fine with me. So then I can save 11/20. Here, let's go to 2016 and go February 22nd, special day for LVS. Let's go ahead and save that. And I'm not sure that I have the functionality on the back end to actually save it. But at any rate, hopefully you get the idea there. That's how we would create then this custom editor template to handle dates and to use this beautiful Bootstrap date time picker. And so that is all that really I wanted to show you about this. It's relatively simple. You just need to get all of the CSS and the JavaScript into the layout page. Then you need to create the editor template folder and add in the date time or the actual editor template itself. Here you can get at data by using the view data that will pass in from, in this case, the edit.cshtml. Here you do anything you want. You plug in any variables that we've created as well as the value that is being passed in as a date time. And then in the edit, we have to use the edit for. The edit.cshtml, we use the edit for helper method, and we're just going to need to pass in data that will be plucked off again here on this side using the view data, looking for that same key ID. All right. And once we do that, and then we adorn our the particular property we want with the right UI hint, we're in good shape. All right, so hopefully that's useful. I've used this a number of times in projects recently so that I could use a bunch of cool jQuery plugins, Bootstrap plugins that are available out there for great input options. There's one by Harvest that I like in particular that allows you to do multi-selections, almost like, you know, how you would add tags to a blog post. You can have a list of options, you can select a number of options, and they will continue to add on as tags inside of the combo box. Very cool stuff. At any rate, so let's continue on. We'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks.